The chamber stretched so wide that Jake could barely see the far walls. Thousands of alien delegates filled the seats, their forms strange and unsettling. Some had too many limbs, others floated in bubbles of liquid. A few glowed with inner light that hurt to look at directly. Jake stood at the center of it all, hands clasped behind his back, trying not to show fear. Beside him, Kate reviewed her data pad one more time. Her fingers shook slightly. She had prepared for this moment for months, gathering evidence and crafting arguments. None of it seemed to matter now. The Galactic Council had already made its decision. This trial was just theater. Commander Ben stood to Jake's left, his military uniform crisp despite the long journey. His jaw was tight, and his eyes moved constantly, assessing threats that might not exist. Old habits died hard for soldiers. He had commanded defense fleets along human borders for 15 years. Now he could only watch as politicians decided humanity's fate. Chancellor rose from his seat high above them. The leader was ancient by any measure, his scaled skin pale and translucent with age. When he spoke, his voice echoed through translation devices that made every word sound like judgment itself. Humanity stands accused of disrupting galactic harmony, began. Your species has expanded too quickly. Your traders undercut established markets. Your military forces show excessive aggression. Most concerning, you refuse to accept population controls or genetic modifications required by council law. Jake wanted to argue that humans had only defended themselves, that their trade was fair competition, that their reproduction was natural. But the Chancellor continued without pause. We have records of 47 border incidents involving human vessels in the past decade. We have economic reports showing human merchants driving 17 species to bankruptcy. We have biological studies proving that human reproduction rates will overwhelm council demographics within 3 generations. Kate leaned close to Jake. They're scared of us, she whispered. This isn't about law, it's about fear. The next speaker was a diplomat named Myra. Her people resembled tall, slender birds with too many feathers. She spoke more gently but her words cut just as deep. Humanity's potential is undeniable, Myra said, but potential without guidance is dangerous. The Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years through careful balance. Humanity upsets that balance. They adapt too quickly. They learn too fast. They refuse to accept their proper place. One by one, species rose to speak against humanity. They complained about human colonies expanding near their territory. The Praxis worried about human technology advancing without proper oversight. They feared human military tactics that seemed too creative, too unpredictable. Finally, Jake was allowed to respond. He stepped forward, and his voice carried through the chamber without any enhancement. Humans were good at projecting confidence even when they felt none. We came to the stars in peace, Jake said. We followed every law we knew to follow. We traded fairly. We defended ourselves when attacked. We asked only to be treated as equals. He paused, letting his words sink in. If our crime is being good at survival, then we're guilty. If our crime is refusing to limit our children or change our genetics to suit your comfort, then we're guilty. But these aren't crimes. They're the foundation of any free species. The chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates agreed. Most did not. Raised one scaled hand and silence fell immediately. The Council recognizes humanity's perspective, the Chancellor said. However, the Council's responsibility is to all species, not just one. We cannot allow a single race to destabilize thousands of years of peace. Therefore, we have reached a verdict. Kate grabbed Jake's arm. Ben moved slightly forward, as if he could physically protect them from what was coming. Humanity is hereby exiled to the frontier world designated 442, announced. All human colonies will be evacuated. All human citizens will be transported to this new world. There you will remain, isolated from the galactic community, until such time as your species demonstrates it can coexist peacefully with others. The chamber fell silent. Jake felt his stomach drop. Exile, not war, not sanctions, but complete removal from civilized space. Is a class 0, continued. Gravity is significantly higher than Earth standard. The atmosphere requires constant filtration. Native life forms are hostile, weather patterns are extreme. The Council believes this environment will teach humanity the humility and restraint you currently lack. Ships will depart within 30 days. The session ended abruptly. Guards escorted Jake, Kate, and Ben from the chamber. They walked in stunned silence until they reached their quarters on the diplomatic station. Kate said quietly. They're sending 3 million people to die slowly. Maybe that's the point, Ben replied. His voice was bitter. They can't kill us directly, so they'll let the planet do it. Clean hands, same result. Jake paced the small room. His mind raced through options, scenarios, possibilities. None of them were good. How long do we have to prepare? 30 days to evacuate all colonies and assemble at the departure point, Kate said, checking her pad. Then 6 months in transit to 442. I've pulled what data exists on the planet. It's not encouraging. Ben pulled up holographic displays. The planet rotated before them, beautiful and terrifying. Green continents stretched beneath swirling storm systems. Oceans looked rough and dark. Mountains rose to impossible heights. 1.8 times Earth gravity, Ben read. That alone will cripple half our population. The elderly, the young, anyone with health issues. They'll suffer every day. The atmosphere is breathable but contains trace toxins, Kate added. We'll need filters constantly. Local fauna includes predators massing up to 8 tons. The largest Earth predator was 4 tons, and that was millions of years ago. We'll die there, Ben said flatly. Jake stopped packing. Maybe, or maybe we'll adapt. Humans have survived worse. No, we haven't, Kate said. Earth was paradise compared to this. We evolved there over millions of years. This planet will kill us in months. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. 3 million humans from dozens of colonies packed their lives into cargo containers. Families wept as they left homes they had built. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Ships meant for trade were hastily converted to carry refugees. Jake spent his time organizing the evacuation. Kate coordinated supplies and equipment. Ben selected which military personnel and weapons could be transported. They worked 20-hour days and slept little. The fleet finally assembled, 40 massive vessels loaded with humanity's survivors. Jake stood on the bridge of the lead ship as they departed Council space. He looked back at the worlds they were leaving behind, knowing they might never return. The journey to 442 took 6 months. People tried to maintain hope, but despair crept through the ships like a disease. Fights broke out. Depression spread. 36 people took their own lives rather than face the awaiting them. Jake forced himself to appear confident. He walked the corridors, spoke to families, promised them they would survive. He wasn't sure he believed it himself. When they finally entered orbit around, the entire fleet crowded viewing ports to see their new prison. The planet looked savage. Storm systems larger than Earth's continents churned across oceans. The continents themselves were masses of jungle and mountain, appearing hostile even from space. Landing sites identified, the pilot reported. There's a valley with fresh water and relatively flat ground. Temperature is within acceptable range, though barely. Jake nodded. Begin deployment. Send the first wave of engineers and military. We build shelter before we bring down the civilians. The first shuttles descended through the violent atmosphere. Jake watched on monitors as they broke the gravity crushed them from the first moment. Lisa felt it like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, her chest, her legs. Every step required conscious effort. Every breath felt incomplete. She watched as construction crews struggled to lift equipment that should have been easy to move. Slower, she called out to her team. Take breaks every 10 minutes. We can't afford injuries this early. But injuries came anyway. Bones broke under the strain of unfamiliar weight. Muscles tore from exertion that would have been routine on Earth. The medical facilities filled within days of landing. Dr. Campbell moved between patients, his face growing more exhausted with each passing hour. We're losing people, told Jake during their evening meeting. Not to disease or predators yet, just to the gravity, hearts giving out, lungs collapsing, bodies that can't adjust fast enough. Jake forced himself to stay upright despite his own exhaustion. His legs ached constantly now. How many? 47 in the first week, said quietly. Most were elderly or already had health problems, but we've lost young people too, strong people. Their bodies just couldn't handle the stress. The settlement grew slowly. Lisa's engineering teams worked in shifts, building basic shelters from prefabricated materials they had brought from the ships. But even simple construction took 3 times longer than it should. Workers moved like they were underwater, fighting against the constant pull of the planet. Kate organized supply distribution from a tent that served as their administrative center. She tracked food, water, medical supplies, and construction materials. The numbers were not encouraging. "We have maybe 8 months of food if we're careful," she told Jake. "The water filtration systems are working, but they're straining. We need to get crops growing or we'll starve." The first attempt at farming failed within days. Seeds from Earth struggled in the alien soil. The higher gravity affected how water moved through plant tissues. Different sunlight wavelengths confused photosynthesis. Plants that grew at all grew weak and twisted. Amy, the lead botanist, refused to give up. She worked 20-hour days in the greenhouses, experimenting with different techniques. She tried adjusting soil composition, light exposure, and watering schedules. Most attempts failed, but slowly she found combinations that worked. "The native soil has minerals we've never seen before," Amy explained to Kate. "Some are toxic to earth plants, but if I filter them out and add supplements, I can get basic crops to grow. They won't be pretty, but they'll be edible." While humans struggled to grow food, the native life watched them with interest. The first attack came 2 weeks after landing. Something that looked like a cross between a bear and a rhinoceros charged through the perimeter, drawn by the smell of human food storage. It stood over 3 meters tall at the shoulder, with armored plates covering its back and a horn-like projection from its skull. Ben and his security teams opened fire. Bullets that would have dropped Earth animals barely slowed the creature. It took sustained fire from multiple rifles to finally bring it down. When they examined the body, they found bones like steel and muscles like cables. "Everything here is built for this gravity," Ben told his assembled security force. "That means everything is stronger, tougher, and more dangerous than anything we're used to. Standard weapons won't cut it. We need heavier firepower." The attacks became routine. Predators tested the human defenses every few days. Some hunted alone. Others moved in packs. Flying creatures with wingspans of 8 meters dove from the sky, grabbing anyone who strayed too far from shelter. Ben's teams learned quickly or died. Lisa modified construction equipment into weapons. Industrial cutters became mounted guns. Transport vehicles got armor plating. The settlement began to resemble a fortress more than a town. They called it New Haven, though the name felt ironic given how little safety it provided. 3 months after landing, Jake stood on the half-built walls and looked out at what they had created. Dozens of buildings now stood where there had been only jungle. Fields showed the first signs of growing crops. Defensive positions ringed the settlement. Against all odds, they were surviving. Kate joined him on the wall. "We lost 6 more people this week," she said. 2 to predators, 3 to accidents, 1 to disease. We're down to 2,912. "That's 88 dead in 3 months, Jake said. The number hurt to say aloud. "Yes, but the death rate is slowing. People are adapting, getting stronger, learning to move in this gravity." Jake had noticed it himself. Tasks that had seemed impossible a month ago now felt merely difficult. His legs no longer screamed in agony after a full day of work. His breathing came easier. The planet was changing them. The real surprise came from the children. Sophie was Jake's daughter, only 8 years old when they landed. She had struggled with the gravity like everyone else at first. But within weeks, she was running and playing while adults still moved carefully. Her body adapted faster than anyone had predicted. Dr. Campbell studied the phenomenon with fascination and concern. "The children born on Earth are adapting," he explained to Jake. "Their bones are growing denser. Their hearts are developing stronger chambers. Their muscles are restructuring at a cellular level. And the children born here." He gestured to the maternity ward where 3 bobbies had been born in the past month. They looked healthy, perhaps even more vigorous than Earth bobbies. "These children are being shaped by this environment from conception. They'll grow up as true natives of this world." By the end of the first year, New Haven had grown into a proper town. Lisa's teams had constructed permanent buildings using local materials mixed with their dwindling supplies from Earth. They had learned which native trees provided the strongest timber, which stones could be safely, which metals could be extracted from the ground. Amy's crops finally produced a decent harvest. The vegetables looked strange, growing thick and squat under the heavy gravity, but they were nutritious and plentiful. She had even managed to domesticate some native plants, discovering that several produced edible fruits. Ben's security forces had evolved into something resembling an army. They wore armor made from the hides of creatures they had killed. Their weapons were a mix of modified human technology and tools crafted from local resources. They knew the jungle now, understood its rhythms and dangers. Other settlements began to spread. Foundation was built in the mountains, where miners extracted valuable minerals. Riverside grew along a major waterway, focusing on fishing and agriculture. Outpost was established as a research station, studying the planet's ecosystem and searching for resources. Jake traveled between settlements, serving as governor of this scattered population. He saw the changes in people everywhere. They moved differently now, more confidently in the higher gravity. They looked different too. Months of hard labor had made them lean and strong. Even their faces had changed, becoming harder and more weathered. "We're not the same people who were exiled," Kate told him one evening. They sat in what passed for their home, a small building with actual furniture. "This planet is transforming us." "Is that good or bad?" Jake asked. Kate considered the question. "Both, maybe. We're losing our softness, our civilization, but we're gaining strength, resilience. We're becoming what we need to be to survive here." 2 years into the exile, Sophie celebrated her 10th birthday. She was taller than Earth children her age, stronger, faster. She could carry loads that would have broken adult backs on Earth. She ran through the jungle with other born children, hunting small game and exploring territories that terrified the original colonists. Jake watched her with mixed pride and worry. She was thriving here in ways he never could. This planet that had nearly killed him was shaping her into something extraordinary. But at what cost? What were they losing by becoming so adapted to this hostile world? The answer came during a visit to Foundation. The mountain settlement had been attacked by a pack of predators that climbed the rocky slopes with terrifying efficiency. Ben's forces had defended the town, but casualties were heavy. Jake arrived to find bodies laid out in rows, covered with sheets. But he also found something else. The defenders had not just survived, they had won decisively. The predators lay dead in far greater numbers than the humans. The people of Foundation had learned to fight as a unit, using tactics and weapons perfectly suited to their environment. They had become predators themselves. "This world was supposed to break us," Ben said, standing among the carnage. "The Council thought it would teach us humility. Instead, it's teaching us how to be apex predators." Jake looked at the bodies of both human and alien predators. He thought about Sophie running through the jungle. He thought about crops growing in impossible conditions. He thought about settlements spreading across a planet designed to kill them. Ben was right. They were not learning humility. They were learning dominance. 3 years after landing, Jake stood once again on the walls of New Haven. The settlement had grown into a city of 50,000 people. More were arriving constantly from the orbiting ships as conditions on the surface improved. In the distance, he could see fields of crops, forests being cleared for expansion, roads being built to connect settlements. "We did it," Kate said beside him. "We survived." "More than survived," Jake replied. "We're thriving." 5 years after the exile, Jake walked through New Haven with the confidence of someone who had finally mastered their environment. The gravity that once crushed him felt normal now. His body had adapted, growing stronger and more efficient. Gray streaked his hair and deep lines marked his face, but he moved with the vitality of someone half his age. The city had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 50,000 people lived in New Haven alone, with another 200,000 scattered across 12 settlements worldwide. The population had actually grown since exile. Families were having children at rates that would have seemed reckless on Earth. But here, children were assets, adapting faster and thriving in conditions that still challenged the original colonists. Kate served as deputy governor now, managing the daily operations of their growing civilization. She met Jake at the administrative building, a solid structure built from native stone and timber. "We need to discuss the northern expansion," she said. "The scouts found another valley suitable for settlement." They spent the morning reviewing maps and reports. Humanity was spreading across the planet, claiming territory and resources at a steady pace. The native predators had learned to avoid human settlements. Those that didn't learn died quickly. But something bothered Jake. 5 years of complete silence from the galaxy. The Council had sent supply ships for the first year, delivering equipment and materials as part of the exile agreement. Then the ships stopped coming. All attempts to send messages received no response. It was as if the rest of the galaxy had forgotten humanity existed. "Do you ever wonder what's happening out there?" Jake asked Kate as they walked to lunch. "Every day," she admitted. "But what can we do? We have no ships capable of faster-than-light travel. We're stuck here until someone decides to check on us. The answer came that afternoon. Sanders ran the orbital monitoring station, a small facility on one of the remaining ships in orbit. He was young, barely 20, born during the journey to 442. He spent his days watching empty space, hopping for something, anything, to break the monotony. The probe appeared on his sensors without warning. It was tumbling, damaged, leaking coolant into space. Hands moved quickly across his controls, calculating a trajectory. The probe was heading out of the system, but he could catch it if he acted fast. "Launching recovery drone," he reported to the surface. "Unknown probe entering system, appears damaged, attempting recovery." 2 hours later, the probe sat in the station's small cargo bay, carefully extracted its data core, and began downloading what information remained intact. What he found made his blood run cold. "Sir, you need to see this," reported to Jake over the communication link. His voice shook. "The probe is from Council space. The data is fragmented, but what's here is bad, really bad." Jake reviewed the data in his office with Kate and Ben present. The fragments painted a disturbing picture. The Galactic Council was collapsing. The carefully maintained peace that had lasted 10,000 years was shattering. The Empire had fractured into civil war. Trade routes were breaking down. Multiple species were reporting conflict and chaos. "When was this probe launched?" Ben asked. 2 years ago, based on the timestamp," Jake replied. "Which means the situation has had 2 more years to get worse." Kate pulled up additional fragments. "Listen to this. It's a message from the ambassador. She's calling for aid from anyone who can help. Refugee crises, economic collapse, warlords seizing territory. The galaxy is falling apart." "Good," Ben said flatly. "They exiled us to die. Let them burn." Jake understood the sentiment. Part of him felt the same satisfaction. The Council had condemned humanity to this, expecting them to perish or at least to be broken. Instead, humanity had grown stronger. There was justice in watching their oppressors fall. But another part of him remembered the innocent species caught in the chaos. The had opposed the exile. So had several other species. And even among there were civilians who had no say in the Council's decisions. "We need to discuss this with the population," Jake said. "This affects everyone." The debate that followed consumed the settlements for weeks. Town meetings grew heated. Arguments broke out between families and friends. The population was divided into 3 rough camps. The first camp, led by Ben and others who remembered the exile most bitterly, wanted nothing to do with the galaxy. Let the Council collapse. Let the species that condemned them suffer the consequences. Humanity should focus on building their own civilization, isolated but free. The second camp, surprisingly large, wanted revenge. They argued that humanity should return to the galaxy with force, conquering those who had wronged them. They had made humans stronger than any other species. They could take what they wanted now. The third camp, championed by Sophie and other born youth, believed humanity had a moral obligation to help. They had survived the impossible. They had overcome every challenge. That strength came with responsibility to assist those suffering, even their former enemies. Sophie spoke passionately at a gathering in New Haven's Central Square. At 15 years old, she was already a lieutenant in the Planetary Defense Forces. She had never known any world but this one, had never felt Earth's gentle gravity or breathed air that didn't need filtering. "The Council was wrong to exile us," Sophie said to the crowd. "They feared us for the wrong reasons. They thought we were dangerous because we competed well. But the real test of humanity isn't how we treat our friends. It's how we treat our enemies when we have the power to destroy them." Her words resonated with many, particularly the younger generation. They had no memory of Earth, no nostalgia for the worlds left behind. 442 was their home. The hardships that had broken some of the older colonists had forged them into something extraordinary. Jake listened to the debates and struggled with his own feelings. He remembered standing in the council chamber, hearing the verdict of exile. He remembered the despair of those first months. He remembered the bodies of people who had died because the council feared human success. But he also remembered the ambassador Myra speaking gently, opposing the exile even when it cost her political capital. He remembered that not every species had voted for their removal, and he understood that revenge, however satisfying, would prove the council right about humanity being dangerous. Kate found him late one night, staring at a map of the galaxy on his display. "You're thinking about going back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think we have to," Jake admitted. "Not for revenge, not even for altruism, really. But because if we don't, we prove that isolation was the right choice. We prove that humans can only thrive when separated from others. And if we go back to help, what does that prove? That the Council was wrong. That humanity's strength isn't a threat to galactic peace. That we can be the most powerful species in the galaxy and still choose mercy." The second signal arrived a month later, confirming Jake's instincts. It was a direct plea from Ambassador Myra, transmitted on channels she somehow remembered humanity using. The message was desperate. "To any human vessels receiving this transmission, we need help. The is blockaded by warlords. Our people are starving. We cannot break the siege alone. I know the Council wronged your species. I know we have no right to ask for your aid. But I am asking anyway, not as a representative of the government that exiled you, but as one person begging another for help." Jake called a final assembly. Every settlement sent representatives. The meeting took place in New Haven's largest building, packed with people standing shoulder to shoulder. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. "We have a choice," Jake began. "We can stay here safe and isolated. We can forget the galaxy that tried to forget us, or we can return." He paused, looking at the faces watching him. Some were old like his, marked by the hardships of survival. Others were young like Sophie, born and shaped by this world. All of them had been transformed by their experience. "If we return, it won't be for conquest," Jake continued. "It won't be for revenge. It will be to prove that humanity's greatest strength isn't our ability to survive or fight or adapt. It's our ability to choose mercy when we have every reason to choose violence." The vote was not unanimous. A third of the population wanted to remain isolated, but the majority agreed with Jake's vision. They would return to the galaxy, not as exiles begging for readmission, but as saviors offering help to those in need. Lisa immediately began work on preparing their ships. The vessels that had brought them to 442 had been maintained but not improved much. They were designed for transport, not combat. She would need to change that. "We have 5 years of technological development done in the harshest conditions imaginable," Lisa told her engineering team. "Every system we've built here had to work perfectly or people died. That's a level of reliability the Council's soft civilian technology can't match. Let's use it." The shipyards went into full production. The original colony vessels were stripped down and rebuilt. Armor plating made from materials forged in the planet's intense heat was added. Weapons designed to kill megafauna predators were scaled up and mounted. Power systems that had been refined through years of struggling against an unforgiving environment were installed. New ships were constructed as well, built from the ground up using designs that incorporated everything humanity had learned. They were smaller than Council vessels, but far more robust. Every component was overbuilt, tested beyond normal limits, designed to keep working no matter what. Ben organized the military personnel. The planetary defense forces had become formidable through years of fighting native predators. They were comfortable with violence in a way that Council species were not. That had given them practical combat experience that peace-loving civilizations lacked. "We need to be careful," Ben warned Jake. "Our people are harder than they were, more willing to use force. That's kept us alive here, but it could be dangerous when dealing with species that never learned to fight properly." "That's why we need clear rules of engagement," Jake replied. "We're going to help, not conquer. Every person in our fleet needs to understand that." The fleet took shape over 6 months of intensive work. 20 refitted colony ships formed the core, each now armed and armored. 15 new vessels, sleek and deadly, joined them. The flagship was named Defiant, a reminder of humanity's refusal to be broken by exile. Ben took command of the military operations. Sophie, despite her youth, was given command of a ground forces unit. Her entire team consisted of born humans, people who had never known any other life. They were stronger, faster, and more resilient than humans had ever been. Jake stood on the bridge of Defiant as the fleet prepared to launch. Kate was beside him, and Ben monitored readiness reports from the tactical station. Around them, crew members moved with practiced efficiency. Most were young, born during or after the journey to 442. This was their chance to see the galaxy their parents had left behind. "All ships report ready," Ben announced. We can launch whenever you give the word. Jake looked down at the planet below. 5 years ago, it had seemed like a death sentence. Now it looked like home. The settlements they had built glowed in the darkness. Forests they had planted stretched between the cities. Humanity had claimed this world and made it theirs. Send the message, Jake ordered. Kate activated the communication system. Jake's words would be transmitted to every settlement, recorded for history. People of 442, today we return to the stars, not as exiles but as free humans, not seeking revenge but offering help. The galaxy tried to break us and failed. Now let's show them what humanity can become. The fleet rose from the planet, engines burning bright against the darkness. They climbed through the atmosphere, past the orbital stations, and out into deep space. Behind them continued its rotation, though that had forged humanity into something new. The Liberation fleet traveled for 3 weeks before reaching the first settled system. The journey gave Jake time to drill the crews and establish protocols. Every day included combat simulations and coordination exercises. Ben pushed the military units hard, knowing that their first engagement would set the tone for everything that followed. The system appeared on their sensors exactly as Ambassador Myra had described. 3 warships blockaded the main planet, preventing supply ships from reaching the surface. Long-range scans showed the warships were old council vessels, powerful but designed more for intimidation than actual combat. They're not even maintaining proper defensive formations, Ben observed from the tactical station. They're positioned to threaten ships trying to land, not to defend against attack. Captain Dan Foster commanded the Vanguard, 5 of the newly built vessels optimized for speed and firepower. He was 30 years old, born during the Exiled journey, and had spent his entire military career fighting predators on 442. Space combat was new to him, but the principles were the same. Identify the threat, strike decisively, eliminate it before it could respond. Vanguard ships advance at maximum acceleration, Dan ordered. Target their weapons and engines. We disable, not destroy. Remember the rules of engagement. The human ships accelerated at rates that would have been uncomfortable for most galactic species. But the crews were born humans, comfortable with higher G-forces than their bodies should have been able to tolerate. They pushed their ships to limits that council vessels could never match. They responded too slowly. Their crews were accustomed to intimidating civilian transports, not fighting an actual military force. By the time they realized the approaching vessels were hostile, the human ships were already in weapons range. Dan's ship fired first, precision strikes that tore through shield generators and disabled engine systems. The other Vanguard ships followed suit, their weapons systems refined through years of hunting fast-moving predators. Within minutes, all 3 warships were crippled, floating helplessly in space. This is Captain Dan Foster of the Human Liberation Fleet, Dan broadcast on open channels. Your blockade is broken. Power down all remaining systems and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. They surrendered without firing a shot. Ben's Marines boarded the disabled warships and secured the crews. The soldiers looked stunned, unable to comprehend how quickly they had been defeated. Jake took the Defiant into orbit around the... Myra's response came quickly, her voice filled with relief and disbelief. Human vessels, this is Ambassador Myra. We received your message but could hardly believe it. You survived. You came back. You came to help us. We survived because we had no choice, Jake replied. We came back because we did have a choice. May we approach? The meeting took place on the surface in the capital. Jake, Kate, and Ben walked through streets filled with thin, desperate people. The blockade had been in place for months. Food supplies were critically low. Myra met them at the government center, her feathers dull from stress and malnutrition. Thank you, she said simply. I know what the council did to your people. I know you have every reason to let us suffer. Thank you for being better than we deserved. Kate organized supply distribution while Jake met with leaders. They painted a picture of a galaxy falling apart. The Civil War had started with a succession crisis after Chancellor Eyre was assassinated. Multiple factions claimed authority, each backed by different military forces. The empire had fractured into a dozen competing warlords. Without the council's enforcement, old grievances erupted everywhere. Trade routes collapsed. Communication networks failed. Species that had relied on council protection found themselves vulnerable to aggression. Refugee ships wandered between systems, searching for any port that would accept them. "How many warlords are there?" Ben asked. 12 major ones," a general replied. "Maybe 30 minor ones. They fight each other as much as they raid civilian populations. The largest force belongs to Commander. He controls the former Council Fleet headquarters and has declared himself Emperor." Jake studied the tactical displays. The scope of the crisis was enormous. The human fleet, while effective, was tiny compared to the forces involved. They could win individual battles but couldn't restore order alone. "We need allies," Jake said. "Species that want peace and are willing to work together, who opposed the exile besides the—" Myra provided a list. 7 species had voted against humanity's exile. Dozens more had abstained, uncomfortable with the decision but too afraid to oppose it. Those species might be convinced to join a coalition. The Liberation Fleet spent the next month moving between systems, breaking blockades and escorting refugee convoys. Each victory was swift and decisive. The trained crews fought with an efficiency that shocked their opponents. Ships designed in the harshest conditions proved more reliable than Council vessels. Tactics developed fighting adaptive predators worked perfectly against rigid military doctrines. Sophie distinguished herself in ground operations. Her unit was deployed to protect a refugee camp being raided by mercenary forces. The mercenaries were experienced fighters from a warrior species known for their combat prowess. They retreated in confusion after encountering humans who were stronger, faster, and more aggressive than should have been possible. "They fight like predators," one captured mercenary told his interrogators. "Not like soldiers, like something hunting us." Sophie's report was more practical. "The gravity on there is 0.8 Earth standard. They're used to moving faster and carrying less weight. When they encountered humans adapted to 1.8 G, they couldn't compete physically. We were just stronger in every way." But the campaign took its toll. 3 human ships were damaged in engagements with larger warlord forces. 47 crew members died in various actions. Every death hurt, but the fleet continued its mission. They had chosen to help, and they would see it through. 4 months into their return, Jake received intelligence that changed everything. The warlord was planning a major offensive against the remaining Council loyalists. The target was Prime itself, the where humanity had been sentenced to exile. Chancellor was trapped in the Council chambers with a small force of loyal guards. If succeeded, he would control the seat of galactic power. His legitimacy would be nearly unquestioned. The Civil War would be over, but it would end with a tyrant in control. Ben was adamant. "Let them fight, let face what he created. He sent us to die, now he can die for us." Sophie argued otherwise. "If we let fall, we prove we're just as petty as the Council feared. We save him precisely because he wronged us. That's what separates us from them." Kate saw the strategic angle. Alive and grateful is useful. Dead makes him a martyr for extremists, and if controls Prime, will be fighting him for years. Jake wrestled with the decision for days. Part of him agreed with Ben. The old Chancellor deserved to face consequences for condemning millions of humans to but Sophie was right about what the choice meant for humanity's character. "We go to Prime," Jake decided. "We break the siege. We save not because he deserves it, but because we're better than the people who judged us." The fleet arrived at Prime to find the planet surrounded by forces. 60 warships formed a blockade. Ground forces were assaulting the capital city. Orbital bombardment had reduced sections of the city to rubble. The situation was far worse than anything they had faced before. "We're outnumbered 3-1, Ben reported. "Even with our advantages, those odds are bad. We could lose half the fleet trying to break through." "Then we don't break through," Jake said. "We go around." The plan was audacious. While the main fleet engaged blockade, drawing attention and forces, Sophie's ground team would use stealth shuttles to penetrate the atmosphere. They would land in the ruined sections of the city and fight their way to the Council chambers on foot. Dan Foster led the space engagement, his vanguard ships striking at the blockade's weakest points. The warships were powerful, but their crews were divided. Some followed out of ambition. Others served him out of fear. None had the unified purpose that drove the human fleet. The battle was vicious. Human ships took damage, their armor by weapons fire. But they kept fighting, using speed and maneuverability to offset the enemy's numerical advantage. Dan's ship lost engines and drifted, but his weapons continued firing until the backup power failed. Below, Sophie's team fought through the ruins. The city was a war zone, buildings collapsed and bodies everywhere. Ground forces were disciplined and well-equipped, but they had never faced opponents who had been forged in a crucible. Sophie's unit moved through the devastation like ghosts. They eliminated enemy positions with brutal efficiency. When they encountered a heavily fortified checkpoint, they didn't stop or slow down. They simply crashed through it, their enhanced strength and aggression overwhelming defenders who had never seen anything like them. The council chambers were surrounded by elite guards. Sophie's team hit them from 3 directions simultaneously, using tactics learned from pack-hunting predators. The guards fought hard, but they were defending a position. Sophie's team was attacking, using momentum and violence of action to carry them forward. The doors to the chambers shattered under shaped charges. Sophie's unit poured inside, weapons ready. They found Chancellor huddled behind barricades with a dozen guards. The old looked ancient and terrified, his scales pale and his movements shaky. Human's voice cracked with shock and fear. How? Why? Sophie lowered her weapon slightly but kept it ready. Because someone needs to prove that mercy is stronger than revenge. You're coming with us, Chancellor, whether you want to or not. The extraction was desperate. Sophie's team fought through wave after wave of enemy soldiers as they hauled toward the extraction point. Above, Dan's fleet had pushed through the blockade, creating a corridor for escape shuttles. Human ships burned and broke, but they held the line long enough. Sophie's shuttle lifted off with secured inside. The old Chancellor stared at the humans around him, unable to comprehend what was happening. These were the people he had sentenced to death. Now they were saving his life at great cost to themselves. The fleet regrouped outside the system, battered but victorious. 5 ships were total losses. 200 crew members were dead. Hundreds more were wounded. The victory had been expensive, but they had achieved something remarkable. Jake visited in the secure quarters where they were holding him. The old Chancellor looked small and broken, nothing like the commanding figure who had pronounced humanity's exile 5 years before. 6 months after rescuing Chancellor, representatives from 40 species gathered at Station Unity. The old trading hub floated in neutral space, far from any. It had been chosen specifically because no single species could claim ownership or advantage. The station's corridors buzzed with nervous energy as delegates arrived. Jake stood in the main conference hall, watching species he had only seen in recordings. Some were familiar from the trial 5 years ago. Others were new faces, representatives of governments that had formed after the Council's collapse. All of them were here because humanity had extended the invitation. Kate had spent months organizing the conference. She had drafted proposals, negotiated with dozens of factions, and convinced skeptical leaders that cooperation was possible. Her hair had gone completely gray from the stress, but her eyes remained sharp and determined. "We're ready," Kate told Jake. "All the major players are here, even some of the minor warlords sent observers. Everyone wants to see what humanity proposes." Ben commanded the security detail, his forces ensuring the conference remained peaceful. Human Marines in dress uniforms stood at key positions, a reminder that humanity had the strength to enforce whatever agreements were reached. Their presence made some delegates nervous, but Ben's people remained professional and courteous. The conference opened with Jake addressing the assembly. He stood at the central podium looking out at hundreds of faces representing countless worlds. Some watched him with curiosity, others with suspicion, a few with outright hostility. 5 years ago, I stood in the Galactic Council chambers, Jake began. I stood there as a representative of humanity, asking to be treated as equals. Instead, we were judged as threats and exiled to a. The Council expected us to die or at least to be broken by the experience. He paused, letting the words sink in. Every delegate knew the story, but hearing it from Jake himself carried weight. We didn't die, we didn't break, we adapted. We survived, we thrived. And when we heard that the galaxy was collapsing into chaos, we faced a choice. We could have remained isolated, safe on our world, watching you all destroy each other. Many of our people wanted exactly that. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. The representative, whose species had pushed hard for humanity's exile, looked particularly uncomfortable. But we chose differently, Jake continued. We chose to return not for conquest, not for revenge, but to help rebuild what was broken. Today we propose a new system, Not a council of the powerful ruling over the weak, but a federation where all species have a voice. Kate activated the displays, showing the framework they had prepared. The proposal was comprehensive but flexible. Every species would have representation based on population, not military strength. Trade would be regulated fairly without favoritism. Disputes would be resolved through arbitration, not force. And critically, no species could be exiled or forced to modify their biology without consent. The debate that followed lasted for days. Some species loved the proposal, others hated it. The delegation, representing the fractured remnants of their empire, argued that the council's hierarchical system had maintained peace for. Why abandon what had worked? Ambassador Myra of the responded with passion. The council's peace was built on fear and suppression. We maintained order by crushing anyone who threatened the status. Humanity was exiled not because they were dangerous, but because they were successful. That's not peace. That's tyranny with better public relations. On the third day, Chancellor requested to speak. The hall fell silent as the old leader approached the podium. Jake had not expected this, had been mostly silent since his rescue, processing his trauma and guilt. I was Chancellor of the Galactic Council, began, his voice weak but steady. I presided over the trial that exiled humanity. I cast my vote to send 3 million people to a world designed to kill them. I did this because I was afraid. The admission shocked the assembly. Leaders never showed weakness or admitted mistakes. The council had studies, continued. Projections showing that humanity would dominate galactic trade within 3 generations, not through conquest or cheating, but through pure merit. They were better traders, better negotiators, better adapters than established species. We feared that human success would diminish everyone else. He paused, his scaled hands gripping the podium. So we exiled them. We told ourselves it was about population control and aggressive expansion. We told ourselves we were maintaining stability. But the truth was simple. We were afraid of competition, so we eliminated it. The hall erupted in noise. Some delegates shouted agreement. Others protested, waited for silence to return. Humanity could have let me die, he said. They had every reason to, every right to. Instead, they risked hundreds of lives to save mine. They proved that their strength is not a threat to galactic peace, but a foundation for it. I support their proposal. I urge every species here to do the same. The old Chancellor's words shifted the debate. Species that had been skeptical began to reconsider. Even the most hostile delegates had to admit that humanity's actions spoke louder than fears about their potential. The vote came on the 7th day. 32 species voted in favor of the Galactic Federation. 5 voted against, 3 abstained. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. The new government was born. The question of leadership was settled quickly. Jake was offered the position of first director, but he declined without hesitation. Humanity liberating the galaxy and then immediately taking charge would look too much like conquest, he explained. We need someone everyone can trust. Ambassador Myra was chosen instead. Her species had suffered under the blockade, and her opposition to humanity's exile was well known. She had credibility that Jake could never match. But the position of Federation Defense Coordinator went to Ben, ensuring that humanity's military strength would protect the peace. The next months were spent implementing the new system. Trade routes were reestablished. Refugee camps were emptied as people returned to their homes. Warlords were either integrated into the Federation or defeated by combined forces. The galaxy slowly began to heal. But the biggest change was in how species viewed each other. The Council had maintained peace through separation and control. The Federation promoted integration and cooperation. Species that had barely interacted before began to work together, learning from each other's strengths. Became central to this new approach. The planet that was meant to be humanity's grave became a symbol of their resilience and a training ground for the galaxy. Jake returned home after the conference, relieved to feel the familiar heavy gravity again. Sophie had stayed on, establishing what she called the Academy. Species from across the galaxy sent volunteers to learn survival skills and adaptive techniques. Most failed the training. The few who succeeded returned to their changed, stronger, and more confident. We're not teaching them to be human, Sophie explained to Jake during his visit. We're teaching them the lessons this planet taught us: persistence, innovation, the understanding that survival requires constant adaptation. Lisa led reconstruction efforts on devastated worlds. Her teams used techniques refined in harsh environment. Buildings designed for conditions proved far more durable than standard construction. Technology that had to work perfectly or people died set new standards for reliability. Dr. Campbell established medical exchange programs. The adaptive techniques humanity had developed, both biological and technological, helped other species survive in challenging environments. The modifications that had allowed humans to thrive in high gravity were adapted to help species deal with their own environmental challenges. Kate served as Jake's chief of staff, coordinating humanity's efforts across the galaxy. She traveled constantly, mediating disputes and organizing cooperative projects. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. They were building something that would outlast them all. Jake himself took a less active role. He spent his days in New Haven walking streets he had watched grow from nothing. The city now held 200,000 people, with more arriving constantly as word spread about opportunities on the. Young people from across the galaxy came seeking the challenge, wanting to test themselves against the planet that had forged humanity into something new. One evening, Jake stood on the old walls with Kate. They watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, Sophie's cadets ran through obstacle courses designed to push them to their limits. Ships lifted off from the spaceport, carrying goods and people to dozens of worlds. "Was it worth it?" Kate asked quietly. "All the suffering, all the death, everything we lost." Jake thought about the question carefully. 300 people had died in the first year alone. Thousands more had suffered injuries and hardships. Families had been torn apart. Lives had been forever changed by the exile. "The Council tried to break us," Jake said finally. "They sent us here expecting us to fail. Instead, we proved that humanity's greatest strength isn't our ability to fight or survive or adapt. It's our ability to choose who we want to be. We chose to help instead of seeking revenge. We chose to build instead of destroy. That choice mattered more than anything else." Kate leaned against him. "Do you think they'll remember? 100 years from now, will anyone remember what we did here?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "Maybe not, but that's okay. We didn't do this for recognition. We did it because it was right." A young couple walked past them on the wall, holding hands and laughing. They were born, had never known any other life. For them, the high gravity was normal. The filtered air was all they had ever breathed. The constant challenge of survival was simply existence. Jake watched them go and smiled. This was humanity's future, not the soft, comfortable people who had been exiled, but something harder and stronger. People shaped by adversity into their best possible selves. The communication console in Jake's quarters chimed later that night. It was Ambassador Myra from Federation headquarters. "Jake, we need your input on the situation. They're requesting membership but want special exemptions that would undermine the whole structure." Jake pulled up the relevant documents and began reviewing them. The work never truly ended. There would always be new challenges, new conflicts, new problems to solve. But that was okay. Humanity had learned on that challenges were opportunities for growth. Sophie visited the next morning, bringing news from the academy. "We graduated our first class of non-human cadets," she said proudly. 5 made it through the full program. They're not as strong as humans, but they're far beyond what their species normally produces. "What did they learn?" Jake asked. "That limits are mostly mental," Sophie replied. "Their bodies adapted more than they thought possible, but more importantly, their minds adapted. They learned to see challenges as tests rather than barriers. That's the real lesson of this place." Jake spent the afternoon with his, watching them play in the high gravity that had nearly killed him 5 years ago. They ran and jumped and laughed, unaware that they were accomplishing feats that would have been impossible for their grandparents at that age. They had made them into something exceptional without them even realizing it. As the sun set again, Jake recorded a message for the Federation archives. Future generations would want to understand how the galaxy had changed. His words would be part of that record. "The Galactic Council exiled humanity to a Class 0 because they feared our success," Jake spoke into the recorder. "They thought the planet would kill us or at least break us into submission. They were wrong on both counts. They didn't break us. It forged us. It made us stronger, harder, more capable than we had ever been." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But strength alone doesn't matter. The galaxy is full of strong species. What matters is what you do with that strength. We could have returned seeking revenge. Many wanted to. Instead, we chose to help rebuild what was broken. We chose to prove that the Council's fears were unfounded, not by being weak, but by being strong enough to show mercy. Jake looked out his window at New Haven glowing in the darkness. This planet was meant to be our grave. Instead, it became the foundation of a new era. The Council's greatest mistake was assuming that hardship would destroy us. They never imagined that humans don't just survive challenges. We thrive on them. We grow from them. We become better because of them. He ended the recording and sat in silence. Outside, the continued its eternal cycles. Predators hunted in the jungles. Storms churned across oceans. The gravity pressed down with relentless force. But humanity had claimed this world and made it home. The galaxy had tried to exile humans to the harshest environment imaginable. Instead, they had forged humanity into something greater. And when humanity returned, they came not as conquerors but as saviors, proving that their greatest strength was not in their ability to survive, but in their choice of how to use that survival. The had taught them well. Why asked? I condemned your species, I sent you to die, why would you save me? Jake sat down across from him. Because 5 years ago you made a decision based on fear. You thought humanity was dangerous because we were successful. You were right that we're dangerous, but wrong about why. We're dangerous because we refused to become what you feared. We could have let you die. Part of me wanted to, but we chose differently. That's what makes us dangerous to tyrants and valuable to everyone else. Was silent for a long moment, then slowly he bowed his head. I was wrong, he whispered. About everything, I was wrong. Ahead lay the galaxy, broken and burning, waiting to learn what exiled humans had become. But a small part of him wondered what would happen when the galaxy learned that humanity had not perished in exile. What would they think when they discovered that they had not broken them, but instead had forged them into something stronger than before? Clouds approached the surface. Massive trees rose like towers. Creatures the size of buildings moved through the jungle. Rivers flowed fast and wild. The shuttle touched down and the rear hatch opened. The first humans set foot on. The gravity immediately pulled them down, forcing them to one knee. But they stood again, slowly, painfully. They took a breath through their filter mask. They looked around at the deadly beauty surrounding them. We're down, came the report. Starting construction of the first shelter. It's going to be hell, but we're here. We made it. Jake allowed himself the smallest smile, made it was relative. They had reached their prison alive, now they just had to survive it.